Hello, everybody. I'm going to try to do a quick review of Chapter 9 of the Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. The title of Chapter 9 is Caught. So now Malcolm is back in Boston, and he talks about being an atheist. He says, quote, he believed that a man should do anything that he was slick enough or bad enough or bold enough to do, and that a woman was nothing but another commodity, end quote. At this time, Malcolm he says that he only had a 200-word vocabulary. He was back sharing an apartment with Shorty, and he says to himself he had become a, quote, predatory animal. He talks about smoking weed, and he got back into cocaine as well. He's still seeing Sophia, even though she is married. She's still giving him money. He says, quote, when she came to Harlem, I would take everything she had short of fare back to Boston, end quote. He briefly talks about being physical with Sophia. I guess he put his hands on Sophia. And he talks about introducing Shorty to Sophia's younger sister. Malcolm ran into Laura from chapter 4, and he talks about how they were happy to see each other and they smoked weed together. It says after a month of laying around in Boston, Malcolm felt that he needed to start hustling again. He started gambling and won $500, which is a lot of money at the time. This is 1940s, and he won against a well-known gambler named John Hughes. He said that this was, quote, my first stake in Boston, end quote. This helped to solidify his reputation with the hustlers in Boston. But Malcolm's about his feelings. He says, quote, I expected then, as I expect today, to die at any time. So he didn't expect to live long. He also talks about needing money for drugs. He said how he stole a gun and then sold it, and he was spending $20 a day on cocaine, and convinced Shorty to start hustling as well. Talks about robbing old rich white people. He said regarding robbery, he said, quote, burglary properly executed, though it has its dangers, offers the maximum chances of success with minimum risk, end quote. He talks about how he was light-skinned and they had to work at nighttime. The group consisted of Malcolm, Shorty, Sophia's younger sister, and Rudy. Rudy was an Italian Negro, was half Italian, half Negro, who has stories about how older whites would do interesting things for pleasure, but Rudy had the connection to some of the older white, successful or rich white men. Their base of operations was in Harvard Square. They had their first meeting in this apartment, and this is when Malcolm plays Russian roulette to convince everyone that he's a leader. He told them, quote, never cross a man that's not afraid to die, end quote. He talks about he says that you should keep your bathroom light on to prevent burglary. A burglar never really knows when someone is in their bathroom, so having a bathroom light on is a good way to prevent burglary. He says that they were mostly stealing Oriental rugs, and they were making good money doing this. He says everyone in the group kept their daily routine. He says, quote, no one knew our hustle, but it was clear that we were doing fine, end quote. He talks about how they would go to the Savoy Ballroom in between jobs, and that would be their alibi. One day he ran into a detective, Detective Turner. He was one of the two black detectives in Boston. He said that they didn't like each other, and long story short, it ends with Malcolm telling Detective Turner that, quote, you've got to kill me, end quote. So he's somewhat suicidal at this point. He doesn't really see, much purpose in living. He says, quote, I had gotten to the point where I was walking on my own coffin, end quote. And he continues, quote, I used enough drugs, briefest cocaine, or both, so that I felt above any worries, any strains, end quote. While Malcolm is high on coke one night, he went to a nightclub and saw Sophia there with another man. He makes a scene, although that's not Sophia's husband, but he makes a scene, and Sophia's husband eventually finds out about this. Sophia's husband came to Malcolm's apartment to approach him about it, and Malcolm hid under his bed. He says, quote, "I had trapped myself under the bed without a gun. I was really slipping," end quote. Next, Malcolm goes to a jewelry store to have a watch that he stole repaired. It had a broken crystal in the watch. He went back to the jewelry shop 2 days later to pick up the watch, but by this time, all the jewelers in Boston had been alerted by the owner that the watch was stolen and it needed this certain repair. So officers were there at the jewelry store when Malcolm came to pick it up, and Malcolm knew that he was caught and he almost killed the officer, but he believes that Allah prevented it. He says, quote, "I believe to this day that Allah was with me then." He says, quote, if I hadn't been arrested right when I was, I could have been dead another way," end quote. So he talks about incident where the arresting officer gets distracted and he has an opportunity to kill him. But he says that there were more officers there as well. So if he would have killed him, he would have subsequently been killed as well. Everyone gets arrested for the burglary except Rudy. Somehow Rudy got away. And when they went back to Malcolm's apartment, his apartment was loaded with evidence from other robberies, from other burglaries, fur coats, jewelry, and that type of stuff. The bail was set at $10,000, and they knew they couldn't afford that. And they were expecting to get 2 years in jail because this was their first offense. They realized that they were in more trouble for being with white girls than they were for the robberies. He says, quote, and he talks about how the lawyers said that how his own lawyer said that he was stupid for dating white women. He says, quote, "To understand any person, his whole life from birth must be reviewed. All of our experiences fuse into our personality." He also says, quote, "The full story is the best way I know to have it seen and understood." So he was fair, like, this is part of his expression that he was getting unfair treatment and that he was a victim of the American society, and the fact that they weren't willing to account for the environment that he was placed in. He felt that he was getting unfair treatment. Malcolm he says that he found Islam in prison, and he says that, quote, "I found Allah and the religion of Islam, and it completely transformed my life," end quote. And that is the end of chapter 9. Share this information if you like what you heard. If you disagree with anything you heard, let me know. Put that in the comments. And make sure you visit malcolmxfoundation.org if you'd like to make a donation to Malcolm or his family. And with that, I will see y'all in chapter 10. Thank you.